ESG tool, technique, approach that you think could make a really big difference with regards to responsible raw materials? So that could be mining, it could be processing, it could be responsible sourcing, it could be the investing and the financing, the insuring, it could be governments, it could be any of those stakeholders. What do you think that tool might be? And just to give you a little bit of inspiration, in case you guys haven't seen it enough during the course of the conference, just to remind you of our little infographic that we've been working around during the course of the last 5 days, 8 sessions. And within here, we have a whole myriad of different tools and techniques that come from very, very different angles and from disciplines and specialists who, in some cases, they might speak to all of us. And in other cases, we might never have realized that they even existed. So part of the purpose of this conference has really been to try and inspire collaboration, hopefully with an effort of, let's going into the big word of the conference, which is co-creation. So how do we work together to actually ascertain how do we make responsible raw materials a reality? So for our panelists, if you're thinking, oh help, what on earth am I going to go with? Hopefully something in one of the white speech bowls here should be able to inspire you. If you're wondering where it is, it's on the website at www.responsiblerawmaterials.com. I'm going to stop sharing now. This is a little bit like a memory game, isn't it, potentially? And I'm going to come to, because Richard asked that question of Dan, I'm going to come to Richard Harrington first. So Richard, from your perspective, what ESG tool do you think either is or could be really, really impactful in terms of making ESG a reality? And after Richard, I'm going to go to Jamie.
Actually, I'm going to be a bit controversial and raise something that's not on your, I'm going to add something to your diagram.
Please do, by the way. So people have been suggesting things during the week, and we are doing an updated version after the conference. So yes, if there's stuff that we're missing, yes, please, please, please tell us what it is. So Richard.
Well, it's great. I mean, and you've got Via's great presentation about, you know, measuring the environment, and you've got a lovely picture of him measuring the tools downstream. What you don't have is the measurement of nature, of what nature was before we get going. And I think that ought to be on there. You've obviously got the impact of the communities and so on, but nature out there doesn't seem to have a voice on your diagram at the moment. You've got you could monitor it, but we need to let nature speak first and then work to it. So that would be my big thing is to develop a metric for nature that is able to be used in the ESG. So it'll add to the E and it will give you a number for the bio part of the E.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Richard. Jamie, I'm coming to you next, and then I'm going to go to Dan.
Okay, if co-creation is the key word there, then as much as I respect that finance has not always been well regarded across all different subsets of the world, finance is now collaborating to make sure that the efforts of so many different parts of ESG actually come together. And if you look at the mining space, the large producing companies require the world and their drivers to get a better value for their shareholders, ultimately from a value perspective. But at the same time, the juniors or the non-producers require the capital markets to exist, let alone to do what they're doing. So if we accept that as a principle, then the collaboration of finance or the capital markets, and that very much includes insurance as well. I was talking earlier this week with regards to a major underwriter in the industry, the ability to simplify or to bring together all of these different areas of ESG in a simple way that everybody can effectively disclose on a standardized basis, to encourage management and reward management for the actions that they take, will allow improved valuations, new pools of capital, better risk, better pricing of risk with regards to insurance, better capacity in the insurance market for these sort of things. And that brings everything, almost every single topic you've had this week, forward and move forward. So everybody's little bit is important, but if finance is the collaborator of it all, then simplicity, standardization, is the most important thing to go forward.
Great. Thank you for that, Jamie. Fantastic. Dan, let's come to yourself next, and then we'll go to Kirsty.
I was going to respond to Richard actually, and his comment about being able to measure nature and the baseline, and baseline surveys and environmental impact assessment are bread and butter. The key is expressing those in numbers that mean something to decision makers. And for a long time we've had this concept of the valuation of natural capital, and I guess the latest big splash in that was the Dasgupta report. So if people aren't familiar with that, that's a report on biodiversity, but it's commissioned by the UK Treasury. So it's really focusing on biodiversity and nature and wilderness, but through the prism of finance and dollars and cents and pounds and pence. And I think one of the issues that I have with this, one of my concerns, is that with the valuation of natural capital, is that you end up with a very simple cost benefit analysis of whether a project might proceed or not. One of my concerns is that it's very difficult to turn some of the fundamental and inherent value that humans place on nature, and that nature places on itself in terms of ecosystem services. It's quite difficult to do that. And if we end up totting it up and it turns out that our gold mine is just worth more, then that might be a very simple decision to make for policymakers, that one is worth more than the other. And I'm just concerned that our attempts at the valuation of natural capital are in their infancy, and might always be in their infancy. These are intangible things that we're trying to turn into finance, but that turning them into simple metrics that makes for simple decisions, which might be wrong. So my concern, I agree we need to be able to do it, but it's how we use it, Richard.
I'm just rather than let this descend, or sorry, elevate into a beautiful debate, I'm just going to carry on around the panel, and there's nothing stopping us from carrying on afterwards. I'm just aware that some people are probably going to have to leave us in about 13 minutes time. But thank you very much for that, Dan. Kirsty, let's come on to yourself, and then we'll go to Veer.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to go for a bit of a cop-out, because I looked at that infographic and I think all of them are important, but equally listening to one of the talks yesterday, I mean, I think you have to address all of them in some way. You can't necessarily miss one of them, otherwise that risks things being missed. But I was struck by one of the comments that Peter Bryant made on one of the talks about two things that need to be considered when they were setting up accounting standards, which were auditing and also being able to compare different standards. So I think that would be really helpful if those things were happening. But yeah, to conclude, I think I'm going to agree with what Jamie was saying. If we could just simplify ESG, that would be a massive help for different stakeholders.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Kirsty. And Amanda has just put into the Q&A that she also agrees with Jamie. So Jamie, you're getting lots of votes at the moment, and I'm sure we all agree with Richard and Dan as well, just to make that really clear. Veer, let's come to your lovely self, and then we'll go to Gareth.
Sure. I think as an ecologist, but also active in this mining space, for me, the big thing is the environmental data. And I think we have to recognize that we've had a major measurement problem up until now. We haven't been able to measure biodiversity properly, or it's been very limited in its scope. And I think the opportunity now to use tools to generate big data, which we can now put into machine learning, we can do predictive modeling. I think this is huge, and I think this will really revolutionize the way that biodiversity data is being looked at, specifically when we can now engage with things like satellites, imagery, and all the other wonderful tools that are coming to light. But I do really echo what Jamie's saying, because I think that ultimately it's going to come down to the financiers and the metrics that they use to gauge these projects. I think now the real challenge is taking these tools and feeding them into the correct metrics that the financiers and everyone else can use and look at, and simplifying them. And I think it's a very exciting space, and it's what we're doing right now, is trying to do that. So that's a positive. And I also think that you could address this in consortia, and do this as a co-production, do this together, share the ideas, even the companies within the mining sector, share those ideas. Don't do this in isolation. I think that was a thing that I could echo as well. That came up in one of the talks by Dan, I think. So yeah, very exciting. That's where I think big changes could come. And especially when you can start engaging communities in that measurement, I think that is now addressing another part of the ESG.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Veer. Brilliant. Gareth, let's come to yourself and then we'll go to Francesca. Oh, Gareth, have you got the mute button? If not, we're going to go straight to Francesca and then we'll try Gareth again.
Okay, so from my perspective, so on the ground perspective, I think an easy but also challenging tool, but it would be quite helpful, is to have publicly available ESIAs with clear mention to the risk registers. I think that creates a completely different level of trust and visibility of what mining companies are doing in terms of impact assessment and community development and managing risks. And that allows for everybody to have the kind of transparency and also having all the stakeholder participating, not just to the identification of the problems, but also the solutions. So I think it's that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Francesca. I totally agree. Gareth, let's try your mute now and then we'll finish off with Ludovine.
Hi there. Sorry, I think my internet all went in slow motion. So but I think it's back to normal speed now. So we had hyper speed and then down to slow motion, haven't we, today? So yeah, to answer, I think I echo Veer and perhaps Jamie and others at other ends. I think to answer simply, observations, true independent observations and measurements, however they are achieved, and then they have to be boiled down to simple metrics to be usable. But to elaborate a bit further, to take emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, like satellites can't do that by themselves. They can't. It's not a solution in themselves. They're a part of a solution. So you have to blend that and calibrate that with ground data in select locations. But each has its limitations. Ground measurements are local. Satellites have a global view. Together we can piece together the whole picture. And that's what we need to do. And then we need to be able to simplify that into things that are reported well and in a digestible way.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Gareth. And just to finish off, Ludovine.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to be honest, I'm going to come back to one of the points I made earlier this week, is that I think in the midst of this complexity, and not to add fire to the controversy, but none of these stakeholders are a single thing. Finance is just a huge collection of savings of billions of people. And so, governments are just the expression of policy choices by millions of voters. And so I think considering the fact that each of these stakeholders actually not only impacts the others, but is the others, can perhaps facilitate the balancing act between all of these varied interests. I like Jamie's proposal that finance can be, the point of coalescence of these interests. I think every single stakeholder should try to coalesce interests, because there can be no single winner if all of these stakeholders don't actually together align around a collective interest. And I know that sounds very fluffy, but in terms of decision making, it also means, systematically placing interest in balance with others. And that's can come down to some hard choices, but I think we need to start making them.
Brilliant. No, thank you very, very much for that, Ludovine. And I think just in an attempt to try and summarize what we have just heard, but then also what we've been hearing throughout the week, and to go back to our infographic, which, yes, please do tell us what we are missing. We always knew we would be missing lots on this. And this is almost, to use Ludovine's words, this is the coalescence or an attempt at it to say, okay, what can we be doing collectively, bearing in mind we all have different perspectives. We all have different desires and wants, and we all have slightly different things that are perhaps important to us as well. But perhaps the simplicity in ESG, it is absolutely not trying to make all of those standards, frameworks, etc., more generic, because actually that makes things more complex. So it's not making things generic. It's perhaps saying, no, out of all of that, what is the stuff that is actually really important? The stuff that creates impact and action and change. One way, and we certainly found this within Jamie's Digby tool, is how do you get some of those standards that might be 300 questions long down to something that is more palatable? You look at those questions that ask about change and impact, rather than asking if somebody has a policy, etc. Because there's no point in having a policy unless you actually use it. There's no point in measuring something unless you do something with that data, for example. So perhaps that is one of the avenues into that simplicity, as perhaps many of us have been calling for as well. And to come on to that central point around finance, having spent all of my career working in this space, if you are the geologist standing there in the field, you can jump up and down and talk about ESG and you can make it a reality. But unless you've got people like the government, like the financiers, etc., also pushing in the same direction, it gets really difficult, because to be honest, you lose your job because you're not going to be rewarded for doing that good stuff. And so this is a case here where what we're trying to do is pull all of that together. So in summary, ladies and gentlemen, in our last few minutes before we wrap up, yes, this has been the Responsible Raw Materials Annual Conference from 2021. This time last year, we were just about finishing a conference that we pulled together. I mean, this was Rose's internship project last year. So a massive thank you to Dan for introducing Rose to ourselves. And Rose, if you're there, please do turn on your camera in a second. So Rose is the person behind this. She is the one who's managed to pull this off. The reason why we did this conference this year is because so many of you reached out and said, when are you doing the next conference? What have we managed to achieve? Well, we've had people from all over the world dialing in and listening to everything that's been going on, engaging in discussion, engaging in debate and challenge. So 5 days, 8 sessions, 73 talks, 81 speakers, well over 500 attendees. We've had lots and lots of people dialing in to watch talks on YouTube after they have been delivered live. And also, as previously mentioned, a massive congratulations to the team behind the scenes for taking all of those talks, adding them into the abstracts within 24 hours of those talks being given. So what it means is that we now on the platform, having started from nothing just over a year ago, we've got well over 150 talks, all of which are 10 to 30 minutes long. So they're short and sweet, delivered by the world experts on a whole wide variety of different aspects of sustainability and responsibility within raw materials. So what does this mean? What comes next? Well, we, of course, are really delighted to hear all of your ideas, and it's great to see, I think Jane Wardy put a suggestion in on the chat of people that we should be reaching out to and engaging with and making this resource that everybody has put together available, or making people aware of this collation of tools, tips and techniques. That's what we want to do. We want to increase that awareness and ultimately make ESG a reality in this space. It is not a nice to have, it is essential. We all need these minerals and metals, but there is very little point in trying to go for our energy transition or anything else unless we actually have a net benefit at the end of the day. And that's a net benefit to nature. To use Richard's insight there, it's a net benefit to the communities, such as those that Francesca was talking about, to our governments and everybody else, ourselves as well. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, a massive, massive thank you to our speakers from today, but also our 81 speakers from the past week, and of course our wonderful organizing group behind the scenes. You've done a phenomenal job. Thank you very much. Round of applause.
Sarah, I'm sure from all of us, many, many thanks to you and all of your team.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. It means a huge amount. And yeah, so please do feel free to disappear off. Enjoy the rest of your Fridays. wherever you happen to be around the world. If anybody does want to stick around for a few minutes after this, if you've got ideas of what we should be doing with responsible raw materials next, we do welcome all of your ideas and insight. Or if you can't stick around, feel free to drop us an email at hello@responsiblerawmaterials.com, and you will get Rose or myself on the other end of that. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good weekend.